we have been trained to believe that progress is humanity's greatest achievement, that each generation necessarily surpasses the last in wisdom, technology, and moral understanding. Yet what if this most cherished belief of modernity conceals our greatest loss? What if the very notion of inevitable advancement has blinded us to the erosion of what makes us most human? Through decades of observing the rise of totalitarian movements and the collapse of political traditions, I have witnessed how the promise of progress often masks the destruction of the conditions that make genuine political life possible. The modern world's obsession with moving forward has led us to abandon the art of beginning anew, that miraculous human capacity for action that breaks the chains of historical determinism. Today we will examine how the ideology of progress has become a form of regress in disguise, destroying our ability to act politically, think critically, and preserve the world for future generations. We will explore how the promise of inevitable improvement has paradoxically diminished our capacity for the very activities that define our humanity: the ability to think without banisters, to judge particular situations without predetermined categories, and to act in concert with others to create something genuinely new in the world. This is not pessimism, but a clear-eyed analysis of what we have lost in our rush toward an imagined future, and what we must recover to remain human. Chapter 1: The Modern Prejudice Against the Past. The idea of progress rests on a fundamental prejudice: that the new is necessarily better than the old, that the future holds solutions to problems the past could never solve. This prejudice has become so deeply embedded in our thinking that we can barely imagine alternatives to it. Yet this seemingly innocent belief has profound political consequences that extend far beyond mere intellectual preference. When I lived through the collapse of European civilization in the 20th century, I witnessed firsthand how the promise of progress could justify the destruction of everything that had previously given meaning to human existence. The totalitarian movements that swept across Europe did not appeal to tradition or conservatism. They promised radical transformation, the creation of a new man, the realization of humanity's highest potential through scientific planning and ideological commitment. The progressive mindset treats the past as a burden to be overcome rather than a treasure house of human experience to be preserved and transmitted. This creates what I call the loss of the world, the destruction of the common realm that connects past, present, and future generations. When we view history merely as a series of steps toward an inevitable destination, we lose the capacity to learn from particular experiences, to distinguish between different forms of political organization, and to preserve the fragile achievements of previous generations. Consider how modern education has been transformed by progressive ideology. Instead of introducing young people to the accumulated wisdom and achievements of human civilization, we treat students as if they must discover everything anew, as if the insights of previous generations were obstacles to their authentic development. This pedagogical progressivism leaves each generation orphaned from its inheritance, forced to reinvent basic principles of political and moral life without guidance from those who came before. The temporal structure of progress is fundamentally anti-political. Politics requires the existence of a stable world that outlasts individual mortal lives, a common space where people can act together despite their differences. But the progressive mentality treats this world as constantly obsolete, always in need of updating, improvement, and revolutionary transformation. Under such conditions, nothing endures long enough to serve as a foundation for genuine political action. Most dangerously, the ideology of progress transforms human beings from actors into specimens of historical development. Instead of understanding ourselves as capable of initiating something unexpected, we become products of historical forces, examples of evolutionary advancement, or raw material for social engineering. This represents a fundamental regression from the political to the biological understanding of human existence. Chapter 2: When process replaces principles. The progressive worldview substitutes process for principles, movement for stability, and development for achievement. This substitution represents one of the most profound losses in modern political life, though it masquerades as sophistication and scientific advancement. In traditional political thinking, certain principles were understood to be permanent features of human existence: the need for laws that outlast particular rulers, the importance of constitutional limitations on power, the distinction between public and private life. These principles were not considered obstacles to improvement, but rather the necessary conditions within which genuine human flourishing could occur. But progressive thinking treats all principles as temporary expedients, useful only until they can be superseded by more advanced arrangements. This creates a fundamental instability in political life, where nothing can be counted on to endure, where every institution and practice is subject to constant revision in the name of improvement. I observed this most clearly in the collapse of legal systems under totalitarian rule. The Nazis did not simply impose arbitrary laws. They convinced millions that traditional legal principles were outdated obstacles to the realization of historical destiny. Law itself became a process rather than a stable framework, constantly evolving to serve the needs of racial development or class struggle. This process orientation has profound consequences for how we understand human action. When everything is in constant flux, when all arrangements are temporary, when principles themselves are subject to historical development, human beings lose the stable world they need to act meaningfully. Action requires a stage, a durable public realm where the consequences of our deeds can be witnessed, judged, and remembered. The modern obsession with methodology over substance reflects this same problematic substitution. We become more concerned with having the right process for making decisions than with the wisdom or justice of the decisions themselves. Democratic procedures become more important than democratic substance. Scientific method more crucial than scientific insight. Economic growth more vital than economic justice. This represents a peculiar form of nihilism disguised as pragmatism. By refusing to commit to any permanent principles, by treating everything as subject to revision and improvement, we end up with no principles at all. Only processes that can be manipulated by whoever has the power to control them. The result is not progress, but regress. Return to forms of political organization that treat human beings as raw material for historical processes, rather than as agents capable of creating and preserving a common world. We have not advanced beyond traditional politics. We have fallen beneath it, into forms of organization that are essentially pre-political. Chapter 3: The Illusion of Liberation Through History. One of the most seductive aspects of progressive ideology is its promise of liberation through historical development. We are told that human freedom increases automatically as history unfolds, that each generation enjoys greater liberty than the last, that the movement of time itself works to break the chains that bind us. This promise has proven to be one of the most dangerous illusions of modernity. True freedom, I have learned through years of political observation and personal experience, cannot be achieved through historical process, but only through political action. Freedom is not a condition that develops over time, but an activity that human beings perform when they act together in public spaces. It is not something we possess, but something we do. The progressive conception of liberation through history transforms freedom from an activity into a product, from something we create through our actions into something that history delivers to us. This transformation fundamentally misunderstands the nature of human freedom and creates the conditions for its destruction rather than its realization. Think about how we commonly speak of progress in terms of freedom. We say that women have been liberated by historical development, that racial minorities have gained freedom through the march of time, that economic progress has freed us from traditional constraints. While these changes have certainly occurred, describing them as automatic historical developments obscures the crucial role of human action in bringing them about. Real liberation always requires specific political acts by particular people in concrete situations. The American revolutionaries did not wait for history to deliver independence. They declared it through political action. The civil rights movement did not trust in the inevitable march of progress. Activists organized, demonstrated, and forced political change through sustained collective action. When we attribute these achievements to historical progress rather than to human action, we make several dangerous mistakes. First, we encourage passivity in the face of injustice, suggesting that time itself will solve our problems. Second, we lose sight of the specific political conditions that make freedom possible, treating liberation as if it required no particular institutional arrangements or cultural practices. Most importantly, the progressive view of liberation makes us vulnerable to losing the freedoms we think we have gained. If freedom is simply a product of historical development, then it can be lost just as automatically as it was gained. We see this clearly in the rise of authoritarian movements that promise to restore order after too much liberation, or in technocratic governance that treats freedom as an inefficient obstacle to rational administration. The countries I have lived in, Germany, France, the United States, have all experienced periods when the promise of progress justified the curtailment of political freedom. Each time, people were told that temporary restrictions on liberty were necessary to achieve greater freedom in the future, that the demands of historical development required sacrificing present political participation for future liberation. This pattern reveals the fundamentally anti-political character of progressive liberation. By locating freedom in historical process rather than political action, progressivism undermines the very activities through which freedom is actually realized and preserved. Chapter 4: The Destruction of Human Plurality. Perhaps the most devastating consequence of progressive ideology is its assault on human plurality, that fundamental condition of political life that recognizes and celebrates the fact that human beings are different from one another, that this difference is not an obstacle to be overcome, but the very source of political vitality. Progressive thinking, despite its rhetorical commitment to diversity, actually works to eliminate meaningful human differences by reducing all individuals to specimens of universal development. Whether the progress is conceived in terms of economic advancement, psychological maturation, or social evolution, the end result is always the same: the reduction of human plurality to variations on a single theme. I first recognized this pattern in the totalitarian movements of the 20th century, but I have come to see that it operates more subtly in liberal progressive societies as well. The Nazi ideology promised to eliminate human differences by creating a racially pure society. Communist ideology promised to overcome class differences by creating a classless society. Both treated human plurality as a problem to be solved through historical development. But even in democratic societies, progressive ideology tends to treat differences between people as temporary obstacles to be overcome through education, therapy, or social engineering. The goal is always greater unity, more consensus, increased social harmony, as if the natural condition of human beings was agreement rather than plurality. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes political life possible. Politics does not arise despite human differences, but because of them. If all human beings were identical, there would be no need for politics, no basis for debate, no possibility of action that could surprise or enlighten us. The attempt to overcome plurality in the name of progress actually destroys the conditions under which genuine political life can flourish. Consider how progressive education treats intellectual differences between students. Instead of recognizing that students naturally have different talents, interests, and ways of understanding the world, Progressive pedagogy often assumes that all students should achieve the same learning outcomes through the same developmental processes. Differences in ability or interest are treated as problems to be solved rather than as valuable sources of diversity in the classroom. The same pattern appears in progressive approaches to cultural differences. Rather than preserving the distinct traditions, practices, and ways of life that different groups have developed, progressive multiculturalism often reduces cultural difference to superficial variations in food, music, and clothing while expecting all groups to subscribe to the same progressive values and participate in the same developmental processes. This assault on plurality is particularly dangerous because it presents itself as tolerance and inclusion. We are told that recognizing universal human development and shared progressive values is more enlightened than celebrating particular differences and distinct traditions. But this universal perspective actually eliminates the very differences that make human life interesting and political life possible. The progressive promise to include everyone in the same developmental process is ultimately more totalitarian than traditional forms of exclusion, because it eliminates the possibility of genuine alternatives to mainstream progressive culture. At least traditional societies acknowledge that different groups might have different ways of life. Progressive ideology insists that there is only one legitimate path of human development. When human plurality is destroyed, politics becomes impossible and is replaced by administration. Instead of debate between different perspectives, we have technical disagreements about the best means to achieve predetermined ends. Instead of action that reveals the unique character of individuals, we have behavior that conforms to scientific predictions about human development. Chapter 5: The Thoughtlessness of Automatic Improvement. The belief in automatic progress represents one of the most profound forms of thoughtlessness in modern life. By assuming that improvement happens naturally through historical development, we relieve ourselves of the burden of thinking about what constitutes genuine improvement and what human activities we should actually value and preserve. This thoughtlessness manifests itself most clearly in our relationship to technology. We assume that technological advancement automatically represents human progress. Without thinking carefully about what kinds of human activities technology enhances and what kinds it destroys, we celebrate each new innovation as evidence of our advancing civilization without considering whether these innovations actually improve the conditions of human life. During my years of observing modern society, I have watched people become increasingly passive in their relationship to change. Instead of actively choosing what aspects of their lives they want to improve and how they want to improve them, they simply accept whatever developments present themselves as progress and adapt their lives accordingly. This represents a complete reversal of the proper relationship between human beings and their world. Instead of humans actively shaping their environment to serve human purposes, we allow environmental changes to reshape us according to their own logic. We become products of our tools rather than users of them, victims of our institutions rather than creators of them. The thoughtlessness of automatic improvement is particularly evident in our approach to social and political problems. Instead of thinking carefully about the specific causes of particular problems and developing targeted responses, we assume that general social progress will eventually solve all difficulties. We treat symptoms rather than causes, apply universal solutions to particular problems, and substitute optimism for analysis. I have observed this pattern repeatedly in American political discourse. Complex problems of poverty, education, or civic engagement are addressed through appeals to inevitable progress rather than through careful analysis of the specific political and social conditions that create these problems. The result is policy making that consistently fails to address root causes while maintaining faith that things are generally getting better. This thoughtlessness about improvement extends to our understanding of human development itself. We assume that psychological maturation, moral development, and intellectual growth follow automatic patterns that require no particular cultivation or guidance. Parents and educators are encouraged to trust natural developmental processes rather than taking responsibility for actively shaping the character and capabilities of young people. But human beings do not automatically improve any more than societies do. Both individual and collective improvement require sustained attention, careful judgment, and deliberate action. When we treat improvement as automatic, we actually create conditions that promote deterioration rather than advancement. The capacity for critical thinking is not something that develops naturally through historical progress, but something that must be cultivated through specific practices and institutions. The ability to make moral judgments cannot be programmed through social engineering, but must be developed through experience with particular moral situations. The skills necessary for political participation do not emerge spontaneously, but must be learned through actual engagement in political activity. By treating these crucial human capacities as products of automatic development, progressive ideology actually undermines the conditions necessary for their cultivation. We end up with generations of people who lack the ability to think critically, judge wisely, or act politically, not because they are naturally deficient, but because the institutions and practices that develop these capacities have been weakened by faith in automatic improvement. This represents progress in reverse. The more we trust in automatic advancement, the less capable we become of the activities that constitute genuine human development. Chapter 6: The Loss of Judgment in Progressive Society. One of the most serious casualties of progressive ideology is the human faculty of judgment, that crucial capacity to discriminate between different situations, to recognize what is appropriate in particular circumstances, and to evaluate the quality of human actions and institutions without relying on predetermined rules or universal principles. Judgment is fundamentally conservative in the sense that it requires taking seriously the particular features of concrete situations rather than subsuming everything under abstract categories. It demands what I call thinking without banisters, the ability to navigate moral and political terrain without the security of universal guidelines or progressive theories that promise to solve all problems in advance. The progressive mindset systematically undermines judgment by treating all particular situations as examples of universal patterns. Instead of asking what is unique about this specific political crisis, this particular educational challenge, or this concrete moral dilemma, progressive thinking immediately reaches for general theories about historical development, social evolution, or psychological growth. This substitution of theory for judgment has profound consequences for political life. Politics always involves situations that are genuinely novel, that cannot be adequately understood through the application of existing categories or theories. Political actors must be able to judge each situation on its own terms, to recognize what is unprecedented about their circumstances, and to act appropriately without guarantee that their actions will produce the desired results. But progressive ideology promises to eliminate this uncertainty by providing scientific theories that can predict the outcomes of political action and guarantee the success of particular policies. Instead of cultivating the capacity for judgment that political life requires, progressivism encourages dependence on expert knowledge and theoretical frameworks that claim to make judgment unnecessary. I witnessed this pattern most clearly during the trial of Adolf Eichmann, where the court struggled to judge crimes that were literally unprecedented in human history. The legal system, the media, and the public all reached for existing categories: war crimes, crimes against humanity, moral pathology, to make sense of what had happened. But none of these categories adequately captured the banality of evil that Eichmann represented. Eichmann was not a monster or a fanatic, but a bureaucrat who had lost the capacity for judgment, who followed rules and procedures without thinking about their consequences, who participated in unprecedented evil simply because he could not think about what he was doing. His thoughtlessness was not the result of stupidity, but of the modern tendency to substitute adherence to abstract principles for the exercise of concrete judgment. This same loss of judgment affects contemporary political life in less dramatic, but equally serious ways. Citizens increasingly rely on opinion polls rather than their own assessment of political candidates. Educators follow standardized curricula rather than judging what particular students actually need to learn. Judges apply sentencing guidelines rather than evaluating the specific circumstances of individual cases. The progressive faith in improvement through systematic reform consistently undervalues the irreplaceable role of human judgment in maintaining the quality of institutional life. No system of rules, however sophisticated, can substitute for the capacity of particular individuals to recognize what is appropriate in specific situations and to act accordingly. When judgment atrophies, institutions lose their vitality and become merely bureaucratic procedures. Laws become rigid rules rather than flexible frameworks for wise decision-making. Educational practices become mechanical applications of learning theories rather than responsive engagement with particular students. Political participation becomes voting behavior rather than genuine civic engagement. The cultivation of judgment requires practices and institutions that honor the particular rather than the universal, that value wisdom over systematic knowledge, that preserve space for individual discrimination rather than reducing everything to collective decision-making procedures. These practices are not naturally maintained by historical progress, but must be deliberately preserved and transmitted through specific cultural and educational traditions. Progressive society systematically weakens these traditions in the name of scientific advancement and democratic equality. But the result is not greater freedom or more effective governance, but the gradual erosion of the human capacities that make both freedom and effective governance possible. Chapter 7: Reclaiming the Power of Beginning Again. The ultimate promise of progressive ideology, that history itself will deliver us to a better future, actually robs us of our most precious human capacity, the ability to begin something genuinely new, to break the chains of historical causation through unexpected action, to interrupt the automatic processes that progressive thinking mistakes for improvement. This capacity for natality, for bringing something unprecedented into the world, is what distinguishes human action from both natural processes and mechanical production. It is the source of whatever genuine hope we can have for the future. Not because it guarantees progress, but because it makes possible forms of renewal that no historical law can predict or control. Throughout my years of political observation, I have been struck by how often the most significant human achievements have come not from following historical trends, but from interrupting them. The American Revolution did not fulfill the logic of colonial development, but broke dramatically with both British imperial policy and classical models of political organization. The civil rights movement did not wait for gradual social evolution, but created new forms of political action that transformed American society in ways that no theory of progress had anticipated. These examples remind us that genuine political action always involves the capacity to begin again, to create unprecedented responses to particular situations, to act in ways that surprise both actors and spectators. This capacity cannot be programmed through social engineering or guaranteed through historical development. It can only be preserved through institutions and practices that maintain space for genuine political activity. The progressive obsession with predictable improvement actually works against the preservation of this space for action. When we assume that the future will automatically be better than the present, we lose the sense of urgency that motivates political engagement. When we trust historical processes to solve our problems, we atrophy the muscles of civic action that democracy requires. Most dangerously, Progressive ideology encourages us to think of ourselves as products of historical development rather than as agents capable of shaping our common world. We learn to see ourselves as specimens of psychological growth, examples of social evolution, or beneficiaries of technological advancement, rather than as political actors who can create new institutions, establish new traditions, and preserve valuable aspects of human life for future generations. This shift in self-understanding has profound consequences for how we approach contemporary challenges. Instead of asking what kinds of political action might address climate change, economic inequality, or civic disengagement, we look for systemic solutions that will operate automatically without requiring sustained political engagement from ordinary citizens. But the problems we face cannot be solved through systematic reform or technological innovation alone. They require the kind of sustained political action that only emerges when people understand themselves as capable of creating something new in the world. When they take responsibility for the common realm that connects past and future generations. Recovering this capacity for political action requires abandoning the progressive faith in automatic improvement and rediscovering the arts of judgment, debate, and collective decision-making that make genuine politics possible. It means treating our institutions not as obstacles to be overcome through historical development, but as fragile achievements that require constant care and renewal. Most importantly, it means recognizing that the future is not guaranteed to be better than the present unless we take active responsibility for making it so. Progress is not something that happens to us through historical processes, but something we create through political action, or fail to create through political inaction. The choice before us is not between progress and stagnation, between moving forward and falling behind. The choice is between understanding ourselves as agents capable of beginning something new in the world and allowing ourselves to be carried along by processes that we neither control nor fully understand. Only by choosing agency over process, action over development, political engagement over progressive faith, can we hope to preserve the conditions that make genuinely human life possible. Conclusion: the ideology of progress, for all its noble intentions, has become one of the greatest obstacles to genuine human advancement. By promising automatic improvement through historical development, it has weakened our capacity for the political action, critical thinking, and moral judgment that real improvement requires. We have not progressed beyond the need for politics, wisdom, and judgment. We have simply convinced ourselves that these ancient human capacities are obsolete. The result is not liberation, but a new form of bondage to historical processes that we neither control nor understand. The path forward requires not more faith in progress, but a recovery of our capacity to act politically in the present moment. We must learn again to judge particular situations without the security of universal theories, to preserve valuable traditions while remaining open to genuine innovation, to take responsibility for our common world rather than trusting it to historical forces. This is not a call for reaction against all change, but for discrimination between changes that enhance human flourishing and those that diminish it. It is an invitation to exercise the faculty of judgment that distinguishes free citizens from passive subjects of historical development. The future depends not on inevitable progress, but on our willingness to begin again, to create new institutions when old ones fail, to preserve what is valuable from the past while remaining open to unprecedented possibilities. This is the permanent task of political life, and no amount of progress can relieve us of the responsibility to undertake it. Only by abandoning the illusion that history will solve our problems can we recover the power to solve them ourselves. Through the patient work of building and maintaining a common world worthy of human habitation,